Okay. Yeah, I am. All right. So tonight's conversation is around public safety. And we encourage everybody to engage in tonight's conversation. We have some pre-submitted questions for our panelists. We have some questions from our planning team. We also have the opportunity for you to ask your question in the chat, or if you would like to ask your question live, please put your name in the chat and we will call on you and ask you to unmute at the time for you to ask your question. All right, next slide. We wanted to highlight one of the resources that was made possible by one of our own. And so we invite Jennifer Allen and Samuel Allen to talk about a few resources that they've been a part of creating and making possible in our community and throughout the state. So Jennifer and Sam, if you'll unmute and
hello,
share.
everyone.
Okay, hello.
So Jennifer is traveling, and is everybody hearing her? Or is it just?
Thank you for allowing us to join.
Mom, step outside. Your signal's breaking up.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let me move around a little bit. I am, and the signal is very slim, so carry this, but let's see if I can get out. And Sam, how do I sound?
That's a lot better.
Is it a lot better? Okay, great.
Yep.
Well, you might see some goats in the background or something. So, okay, we're good. So thank you for inviting us, Melanie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay, would you like, what would you like for us to address this evening?
So I'd like for y'all to talk about the work that you've done to help make driving a safer and more communicative experience for individuals with communication barriers when law enforcement pulls them over, as well as some of the other activities that y'all have been working on and the links that you've brought to share with us tonight.
Okay, great. Sam, if you don't mind, let me start out.
Okay.
Being as Sam is my son, and he was approaching driving age, and Sam is diagnosed with autism, high functioning autism. And at that time, he is currently 25. And at that time, he had, the school district had really not worked with people with Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism in their driver's ed. So I was truly, truly frightened for him to drive, as a lot of parents are with their children on the spectrum, in that if he were to be pulled over, my fear was that he would not be understood or misunderstood and thought of as perhaps combative. So we set out to together to change that and to be able to have a designation on the driver's license. And what we found out, we had gone to Universal City, and we found out that there was a code called communication impediment with a peace officer, but the DPS didn't even know about it. The workers there wasn't even aware that that existed. So the number one step was to make sure that people knew about that. So once that happened, we were able to get, as you see on your screen right now, we had brochures and posters in Spanish and English placed in all the DPS driver's license offices across Texas. In order to do this, we had to have a bill passed into law That's how hard it is to get information in the DPS offices. So we had to go through that whole process, but House Bill 1434 was passed and a couple of sessions ago. And so you do see this. So now you can get a code. What that does is allow the officer to know, but not to allow the public to know, because if there was some sort of a designation out on your car, sometimes you're fear of public scrutiny. So that was the first phase. The second phase was we felt like it wasn't enough. So if you were pulled over and the DMV, were to pull you over, a law enforcement officer, and they put in your license plate, typically that inventory is used to see if the vehicle is stolen. But we thought, what about if you use that inventory, if you choose to say this is a person driving this vehicle with autism or deaf or hard of hearing, or you could really plug in Parkinson's and Down syndrome and many others, where there's communication could be a challenge. And so with the Samuel Allen law that was passed last legislative session, you can now register your vehicle with the DMV as a person with autism, and it will be hidden from the public. So there's no card to have to show them. There's no big banner on your license plate. It will show up in the TLETs when the officer pulls you over. It will say this is, so they'll know prior to approaching the vehicle that this person has a challenge with communication. Sam, do you want to explain from your point of view why this felt right to you? Because everything was done through your eyes.
I think it felt right because, I've just for years, I've had, dealt with having Asperger's syndrome, and I felt like having this would be kind of a safety net of sorts, if I was to ever be pulled over. We didn't do this just for me. We did this for anyone else out there who happens to have some kind of communication impediment, whether it's Parkinson's, whether it's stuttering, whether it's deafness. We wanted to do this for everyone who needed this kind of protection.
So with this law passed, you can have all this put either on your driver's license, state ID, or in your vehicle if you have a vehicle you want to register. And Melanie, I had forwarded that information to you. I'm not sure. Do you want me to put it in the chat? Would that help at this point?
So I have Natalia, who will be putting those links in the chat for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. So there are links there, and I will say you can also go to the governor, the Texas governor's website and all there. But actually, one of the links that, and it will tell you, y'all are one of the first to know that Canada is adopting everything that we're doing here in Texas. We're the first state to implement such a program, and we're thrilled to know that New York and Canada are mirroring and asking for information now on what we're doing here in Texas with the Samuel Allen law. So it's new, and we are trying to get the word out because COVID hit, and and everything became very second or third, to all that was going on in the state. But we never had a chance to promote it. But we're about to launch a billboard and public service announcement campaign coming up in about 3 to 4 months that will notify Texans more of what this law can provide, so you choose to use it.
Awesome. So we have those links posted in the chat. We are now, a lot of us are more aware of this resource, and I certainly encourage people to go out and tell your friends and family and the groups that you work with about this opportunity to increase safety and increase communication between our drivers and law enforcement.
And Melanie, if I may, I want to add, we also did a training that is posted for all law enforcement officers in TCOL, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, on the website. There is a whole training under communication impediment with a peace officer, and it goes over, it shows Sam being pulled over and what could happen or what could be misconstrued as defiance in that reenactment. We also got Emma Faye Rudkin, who is deaf, to be able to do also a pull over. We have been so blessed here in San Antonio to work with the SAPD, who have just so graciously, Chief McManus has allowed us so much. Sam and I training, but they on their end have been so proactive in helping us with reenactments and such. So we're really blessed that we have such a wonderful law enforcement community surrounding Bexar County.
Awesome. Do y'all have any last comments to make or any last resources? We will also send the information that Jennifer and Sam provided out in our follow-up survey. So we'll post that to our Conversation 360 site and put a link in the survey when we send that out afterwards. But Jennifer, I know you're traveling and I appreciate your time. And Samuel, looks like you're going somewhere too. And
Yeah.
we
Melanie,
just appreciate you sharing. Go ahead.
there's some questions in the chat, and then I think Rachel had their hand up as well.
We have,
yeah.
the question came in first from Karina, and
So-
she asks, are there any potential risks to disclosing a disability in this way?
I will, Sam, I'll let you answer too, but we looked at this at all angles. When we first started this program, Rena, what they had suggested was to put it on the license plate, maybe a designation. And Sam was one of the first to say, whoa, I don't want, those bullies that were in middle school have grown up and they're out there. So I really am not interested in other people knowing. This is protected way that only the law enforcement officer approaching the vehicle or looking at the driver's license or state ID, they're the only ones that will know that this person has, seem to be, I mean, I could maybe think of scenarios, but other than, I was also afraid of the officer asking Sam for his driver's license and Sam taking a card that just says he has autism out, and the officer would think, we've been told by law enforcement, they'll be afraid he's reaching for a gun or something. So I think weighing it all out, just between the officer and the person that is diagnosed, should they choose to do that, would be the safest way. Sam, do you have anything you would like to add about, is there a fear you might have with this?
I'm going to be, I guess, just blunt and straight to the point. There really is no 100% foolproof way of dealing with malicious people or preventing maliciousness. There is a very, very small chance, but there is a slight off chance that, maybe there's a malicious officer out there who may, do something with that information. But again, it's very astronomical that something like that could happen. A lot of officers, would never want to do any harm like that. But
we have found in our training, they truly welcome the knowledge because they cannot stand going up to blindly to a vehicle and not knowing if that person, anything about them. So it's been a real education to hear from their standpoint. They say the more knowledge of the person, the better. But like Sam said, I don't know if you might could get I don't know, something strange happen. That I guess that's always a small percentage chance that could happen.
But by keeping this information out from public eyes, by having, say, a decal or some kind of symbol that anyone can see, this heavily mitigates any kind of malicious activity directed towards someone with a disability.
So we have a couple of other questions in just a few minutes left till we start in on our panel. One of these actually might be more of a question for our panelists, but with the information available on a an ID, a Texas ID, what's so somebody who doesn't drive, right, and they're stopped by the police, what's the likelihood that the police officer is actually going to be looking? I guess they'll check a driver's license when they initially interact with the person, or what's the benefit to having it on an ID as well as the driver's license?
It'd be a really good question for the law enforcement
Yeah.
officer, but I think that there's many a time that people are not, for instance, when we're going to speak at autism conferences and such, I have a lot of people just grateful because their child will have an ID, though they're never driving. And they feel a comfort by having it on there. Should it be, let's say there's a ruckus going on at a house or something, and the law enforcement officer comes to the house and, they're wanting to see everybody's ID. They're going to be able to see that this person, has a communication challenge right off the bat. And I think there are other instances where they're asking for an ID that, if let's say they're out and there's a disturbance out. I think there was something recently, I think it was like 2 years ago with Sapd, where there was an officer and he asked to see somebody's that was out in the middle near Schlitterbahn in the middle of the interstate. And I asked to see an ID, and it, that explains, this person, there's a challenge here, with communication, though that person never would be driving. So there are instances where it would benefit, but again, it's not a neon sign on them, but the officer would have to ask for some form of ID, and there they would know that this person's diagnosis.
Okay. And speaking of diagnosis, is it just a communication notification on the license, or does it go into detail about what the diagnosis is?
At this time, it is just communication impediment with a peace officer. And it will say, like I believe in the DPS, I believe if you're in the driver's license office, it will go subcategory autism, but it's not actually on the driver's license. I will give you a second part to that question that you asked, Melanie, is that right now I'm working with the Governor's Committee on People with Disability. We're working closely with DPS and DMV both to be able to subcategorize that when you register your vehicle with the Samuel Allen law, because right now it comes up in red, communication impediment, but we do want that subcategory to happen. When we passed this law, they didn't allow us the subcategory. So we just took the communication impediment, but there's an ongoing work to be able to put post-traumatic stress disorder or, Parkinson's or Down syndrome or autism. So that's coming. But in most cases, it's just communication impediment.
Is this information I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hate to cut this short, but I actually have to go now.
No worries. Thank you so much for joining us, Samuel.
Be careful,
no
Sam.
problem. All right. And, I'm sorry.
Bye,
again,
Sam.
I'm sorry I have to cut it short. All right. Goodbye, y'all.
So Jennifer, is this information available when an individual with a disability has any type of interaction with the law enforcement? And I would assume that if it's on your text, if it can be put on your Texas ID, that would be the case?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yes, you can, it's Texas ID or your driver's license, or now through the DMV when registering your vehicle.
Okay. Is the designator visible on your license, or is it just in that coding?
It is, there's a letter on the front of the driver's license, where it has, like, if you're wearing glasses, what restrictions are, there. It'll have a letter where the law enforcement officer knows to turn it over. And on the back, it'll say communication impediment.
Okay. So this person's concern, and we just have 1 minute left, is so you use your ID for jobs, for example, and so basically if anybody knows that coding, then it would be out there that you have a communication difficulty.
Correct. That's why it's a choice. I mean, you have to weigh it all out. I think like in our case with Samuel, it gave him comfort. He felt always good. He feels so safe with law enforcement, and they always seemed like the more information, the better. But he doesn't, when he, like, let's say he went to work for HEB, he's in IT. He did not disclose his autism. He chose not to. But he did, tell after he was, he told a couple people, but I don't think anybody looked at his license. I don't think anybody asked, but I think that's something to consider. I mean, you either decide you don't mind somebody seeing or not. But for the most part, I know with Sam, he said he has felt it to be completely between him and law enforcement. He's never felt anybody looking and knowing what the code meant or to flip it over or, but that's again, personal choice. That's something to think about.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. There might be a few more questions. Rachel, I know you had your hand up, but if you'll put your question in the chat. You're always so gracious to respond, so I will send you any additional questions that we need responses to, and we'll get those back out to our participants tonight. Again, we appreciate your time for joining us and telling us about this wonderful resource that we have to make our drivers safer in Texas.
I'm honored. Thank you so much, Melanie. And again,
hey,
I
Jennifer.
sure do thank her. Oh, hello. Oh, I see you.
How have you been?
Doing very well. I told Melanie, I don't know if I'm on video, but I'm out here with the goats way out the country, and I had to almost stand on one foot to get signal. So, but doing very well. And I don't know if you were in at the beginning of the call, but I told them how Canada is now implementing the Samuel Allen law and all the work that we've done here in Texas. So please share that with Chief McManus, because he and the group there, y'all have been a big part of making this such a success.
Thank you, ma'am. Tell Sam I said hi. I couldn't do it because the audio was all messed up, but finally I got it.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you. And please direct any questions. I'll do what I can to answer. And thank you.
Thank you. And participants, I have to apologize. When I was recognizing our partners who make this possible, I neglected to recognize our interpreters this evening from the SAC ASL interpreter program. So thank you, ladies, for being with us and for improving our communication this evening. All right, so now we're going to move along and introduce our panelists. We are super excited to have some very knowledgeable and very engaged people here with us this evening to help us explore best practices in other communities, to explore what we're doing here in San Antonio with law enforcement, as well as the training that is available. This is also your opportunity to ask questions about our local law enforcement, as well as what's going on in other communities. And as we wrap up this evening, I am just going to talk a little bit, and perhaps one of our panelists can talk a little bit about it as well, because they'd certainly be more knowledgeable. But our community is currently undergoing a police review, a police service review, to explore community expectations of law enforcement interactions, as well as how 911 calls are handled. So we're excited about that going on in our community. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Dr. Colleen Bridger. She is the Assistant City Manager and has been since 2019. She oversees the Metropolitan Health District, Parks and Recreation, and the Department of Human Services. She previously was the director of the San Antonio Metropolitan Health District, where she was responsible for implementing policies and programs aimed at improving the health of the population in San Antonio and Bexar County, and has been highly involved with the police review process that we're going through right now and looking at best practices in other communities. Next, We have Deputy Chief Karen Fox, and she has served with SAPD for 31 years. She currently serves as the Fusion and Covert Division Commander. She oversees the SAPD's mental health unit, and she recognizes and is aware of the community's fears and concerns when police officers engage with residents living with mental illness and intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, through training and partnerships with appropriate resources, Deputy Chief Fox believes that these encounters can build positive relationships and trust. Next. Next, we have Officer Adrian Garza. He's been a SAPD police officer for 25 years. He's currently an instructor at the San Antonio Police Academy. He received his license to teach in 2007 from the TCOL, which y'all heard Jennifer mention earlier. He currently teaches traffic law, crash investigation, DWI investigation, deaf and hearing impaired driver, firearms instructor, driving instructor, HIT instructor, ASP baton instructor, taser, defense tactics, and radar instructor. Next. And our fourth panelist this evening is Officer Rowell Lucio. He's been an SAPD officer for 18 years. He works patrol for most of his career, serving the different communities of San Antonio. He has the traffic highway interdiction officer, or he is a field training officer and a member of the civil disturbance unit. Prior to his military, he served in the U.S. Air Force for 8 years. And I know that we have Officer Rimmers with us as well to chime in with the conversation. But with that, knowing what the topic of our conversation is this evening, I'd like to start with Dr. Bridger and just tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing and why conversations like these might be important to you and our community.
All right, thank you, Melanie. Good evening, everybody. We are working. So there's a team of us at the city that are working on police services review. And my specific aspect of it is to identify team-based approaches to some of the 911 calls that we recognize need a multidisciplinary response. So those calls are calls involving mental health or substance abuse that do not involve a weapon. And again, remember, these are calls to 911. So that's the first group. The second group is calls for homeless issues. And then the third one is calls for, oh gosh, now I can't remember. Sorry, it's been a long day, y'all. Mental health, homelessness, and domestic violence. So the third one is domestic violence calls. So each of these things are very different, but the one thing that they share in common is that you really do need a multidisciplinary response. Not just to deal with the immediate crisis, but in order to help the individuals get out of the situation that has caused them to have to call 911 in the first place. So that is the focus of the work that I've been doing, is trying to figure out who all from the community can we involve in this process to do a better job responding to those calls. And of course, that ties into the work that Deputy City Manager Maria Villagomez is leading, which is the entire police services review that's looking at a variety of issues that we are trying to improve or tweak. And Melanie, I noticed that you put the link to that website in the chat. And so if you click on that link, you can see the results of the survey, and you can also give input into what you think about the results or the questions that we're asking. So to address your last question, why is this important? We've literally had 27 community meetings to talk to various community stakeholders, representatives, district, and just general community folks to find out what they think about this police services review, to ask them some specific follow-up questions based on what we're seeing from the scientific survey, and to generally get the community's input into the work that we're doing around this review. And so it's really important to us to get input from the entire community, including, your community as well. So all of us are really excited to be here to answer questions and, as the title mentions, have a conversation and figure out what you need us to know.
Deputy Chief.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting the San Antonio Police Department to be a part of this very important panel discussion this evening. Anytime that there's an opportunity to have a conversation to advance the public safety for our residents living with intellectual and developmental disabilities and our police officer, SAPD wants to be front and center. We want to be leading and learning at the same time from this discussion. And so, as Dr. Bridger said, that public safety review that we're doing right now is critical. I encourage everybody to go to that site that you shared. Overseeing the mental health unit for the San Antonio Police Department, as I do, I recognize the importance of the review of our mental health unit that we're currently undergoing. But at the same time, I also recognize that IDD are a different type of disability. And at that, it requires a different response from police officers. And so, we want to make sure that our police officers are ensuring the safety and the well-being of every member of our community, but especially our most vulnerable residents. And those are our members of this community who are living with IDD, who don't always feel safe when they're engaging with our police officers. In fact, it's quite challenging. And, having been on this department for 31 years, I worked the streets for 7 years of that time. And so I've engaged with many of our residents. And so I recognize that they don't feel safe. And it's challenging for our officers too, because they don't always understand, they can't always identify, it's not always obvious, or the signs aren't always outward facing for an officer to identify. And so it's because of that we need the training that Ms. Allen and Samuel talked about. As a matter of fact, they have taught in our academy for 4 or 5 years. They've done a fantastic job training our officers in regards to IDD and how we being police officers can better engage. And so many times during those encounters with law enforcement officers, some individuals with IDD don't understand what officers are trying to communicate. And at the same time, the officers don't understand either. So, as we're providing this training and trying to understand this awareness, we kind of come at it at kind of 3 different approaches. We try to teach the officers, we try to inform them about IDD. We provide them tools and resources that increase their knowledge and skills. as they interact with the IDD community. And at the same time, we're helping to build relationships between IDD and the law enforcement community. And that's what we're here to do today, to answer as many questions as we can and to be available to help guide this conversation.
Thank you. Officer Lucio and Garza, whichever one of you would like to go first. We'd really like to hear about some of the training that goes on at the Academy that is around working with individuals with disabilities in our community, and why conversations like this are important.
I will let
Well,
Officer Garza answer.
Yeah, I didn't want to cut you off, Lucio. I'll start in if I can. I
Please
think
do.
the training that we're providing is the best training I've ever seen so far coming out from the Academy. I first met Sam and his mother, Jennifer, through this program. That's why I'm basically the guy that started to bring them and incorporate them into our training when we teach cadets. So yes, when I was trying to answer some of the questions that y'all are asking Jennifer, back to the driver's license and all that stuff, and even with the license plates, the reason why they don't put deaf on the license plates is because the Texas governor didn't want to put it in there like this is a target because this person's deaf. So they put it in there for law enforcement. So when we run the license plate on the vehicle, it will come back and pop up and say to the law enforcement only, this person has speech impediment or communication impediment, I'm sorry, for their driver's license and for that possible registered owner of that vehicle.
Officer Lucio?
Yes, ma'am. No, he's the main, Officer Garza is the main one that runs the program right now. I'm a new instructor and I'm taking over, so I have big shoes to fill. So I'm taking all I can from him to learn as much as I can so I can continue to further teach the cadets what he has done so far.
Okay. Well, Officer Garza, can you tell us a little bit more about any other specific training? So we know we have the communication impediment and the laws that go with that and the training around that. But when you're working with individuals with IDD or those who are deaf or those who have a physical disability, are there specific trainings that law enforcement goes through at the Academy? How much training and how often, and is that required?
So we actually have that in our requirements for our 4-hour mandated course that the state actually has us teach, and that's that deaf and impaired driver's course that I put on, that I teach. And a lot of things that we teach is not only how to communicate, how to approach. With autism, we're actually instructing the cadets how to approach, and not only just how to approach, but also reading body language, facial expressions. And then we go into how to communicate as far as like, if I were to get a call for, let's say, a family disturbance involving someone who's autistic, I would first contact like the parents and say, hey, well, tell me your side and what helps your son, because they know how their son or daughter reacts towards certain they're attached to certain things, like as far as like teddy bears, stuff like that. What calms them? And we go on from there to basically meet with the subject who has autism. And I teach the cadets not to solely like stand over them, because standing over them shows them that a kind of empowerment. You want to get down to their level when you're actually dealing with somebody with autism. And same thing with questioning. We don't ask direct questions when we have there for someone with autism. So that's a lot of things that we teach them too. We also give them scenarios with, let's say, for example, I specifically show a video from an officer in Seattle that actually shot and killed somebody who was deaf. So the cadets see the video, and then we actually interact and ask, how could we fix this? How would you approach this kind of situation?
Okay. In any of the other programs, Deputy Chief, is there anything that you would like to touch on with the work that you're doing and the training involved?
You know, one of the very first things that we want our officers to understand is that from a tactical perspective, is when we're engaging with those living with IDD, you know, we want officers to slow things down. If we have knowledge that a call that an officer is responding to, they're going to engage with a community member who has a disability, we know that things need to be slowed down, and that communication is extremely important, because we've received the training that communication is often the barrier. And so we often know that many of the individuals living with disabilities, you know, participate in STEMing. So we teach cadets and incoming officers that many of individuals with IDDs STEM, and that's how they calm themselves. That's how they release their anxiety. So, you know, if you think about police officers and tactically, the last thing we want are folks flailing around and their hands moving. But in this situation, a lot of times officers have to understand that that's part of a person with IDD. That's how they calm themselves. So we teach cadets that, we teach officers that as well. You know, oftentimes when a person with IDD doesn't want to look you in the eyes or in the face, it's not that they're trying to hide something, or they're being disrespectful, or something's awry. That's just their behavior. And so these are all the things that Officer Garza and the folks at the Academy teach. And that's one thing that the officers need to understand, is that, you know, things that they typically encounter on the street are not typical when they're handling calls that are involved with individuals living with IDD. And resources and our training partners. We've had Any Baby Can come out. When I was the assistant commander at the Academy, we had Any Baby Can come out, and they provided just incredible training to officers when it came to IDD and autism and that sort of thing. So I think SAPD is doing a good job in providing our officers training. We can always do better, but I think officers have a good understanding.
And Officer Garza, you also bring in the Lighthouse for the Blind to work on training for working with individuals with visual disabilities. Is that correct?
I actually did try to contact them. I was trying to get them to come out there. The other persons we were using was San Antonio interpreters. They would come out as well.
And Dr. Bridger, can you talk to, while training of officers is one thing, training our youth so that when they get to an age where they might have an encounter with law enforcement is also important. Have you seen any best practices in other communities with collaborations between law enforcement and the public for that training mechanism? So how do we teach our youth one, how to interact and engage and respond to law enforcement, but yet still stay safe, because not everybody who says they're law enforcement is. So how do you have you seen any best practices in that area?
So that's something that we're actively researching now and trying to see. So if you are aware, or if anybody on this Zoom is aware of best practices, we would really like you to share that information with us. We're looking at a number of different response options and helping the community understand the best way to report and respond concerns to the police is part of that that whole package.
Officers, when somebody has an intellectual or developmental disability or a visual disability, how do you recommend somebody staying safe and asking for verification, but without, eliciting a negative response from the police, but also at the same time keeping themselves safe by making sure and verifying that you are in fact an officer of the law? Is there a certain way that people should go about that?
Well, it's more about the approach and also from the person that we're encountering. Of course, we want them to calm down because the calmer that they are, we're going to be calmer when we approach. We teach in the class that I teach for autism. I teach their cadets to speak in a calm voice and in a calm manner, and specifically don't ask direct questions towards them. And I have different scenarios within my PowerPoint that I have as well. I know one of the things that's most troubling to me is when I teach the cadets this part for autism, that when it comes to females with autism, it's more severe in females than it is in the males.
Okay. Deputy Chief, do you have anything to add?
I don't. Adrian does. If you ever want to witness somebody put on a very good course, Adrian does a fantastic job. I think it's about communication. I think this comes down to being able to communicate effectively and to not ask those direct questions. And it's the demeanor and it's the approach. I've seen it time and time again, and it's exactly as Officer Garza has said in the way he teaches.
So if a person with a disability is just trying to verify the validity of the officer, addressing that question in a calm manner is the best thing that we can do with our loved ones to teach them how to keep themselves safe and make sure that they are in fact dealing with a law enforcement officer. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Shanti, do we have any questions in the chat that we can start asking?
Yes. We have a question. Are the trainings especially for those on autism, like with autism led by autistic people?
So Officer Garza, are the trainings that teach people how to engage, teach law enforcement how to engage with residents, do you incorporate people with autism into that training practice?
Yes, I do. It's also one of the things I hit on a lot is if we were to receive a phone call, 911 call, let's say, for example, of a missing person with autism. Okay, one of the main goals that I drive to is I need to find out, as I'm a responding officer, is there any bodies of water close to that house? Because people with autism are attracted to water, and in 99% of them, when they get lost, they are attracted to water, they will drown. So one of my instant questions I'm telling my cadets, make sure you're asking, who has a swimming pool? Is there a river or a lake close by to your house? Where do they normally tend to whenever they do run away? Same thing for fire. If there was a fire call, people with autism tend to stay inside the residence because they're scared. They'll stay and hide because they're in fear. I actually had my cousin do that. He actually set the house on fire and he actually died, and he had autism and he stayed inside the house for that one. That's the reason why I like to teach this course.
So we have a question in the chat that was sent to me. So this one is probably for Deputy Chief. Her grandson is in jail with PTSD and has learning disabilities and severe depression. He's in jail without any help at all. What are some things that families can do to advocate for our loved ones, to make sure that they're getting the support services that they need when we know what their diagnoses are, and maybe the law enforcement might not?
Well, my first question, I guess, would be, is if this individual in jail may have some kind of caseworker or services, social services representative or something along those lines, to know that. I'd be more than happy to provide my email to this person, and we could chat offline and try to figure that out. I'll put my email in the chat here, and whoever that person is, they can email me. I'd be curious, but I'd help them follow up on that for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely.
So if you would like to ask your question live, you can put your name in the chat, or please feel free to put your question in the chat, and we'll continue to go through them. So Rachel, I'm going to let you ask your question if you're comfortable doing that.
Hi. Some of the, sometimes firefighters or others, paramedics are the first people that people with disabilities come into contact with, even at a crime scene. And I'm wondering, do they receive any training? We're talking about the police officers and their response, but they can really affect people, even to the point of causing them so much stress it could kill them in a life and death situation. Thank you.
Does anyone?
So I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can answer that. Actually, our San Antonio Fire Department do actually get that training for autism. They're trained specifically to look for, read their body language and ask for permission. I'll give you an example. Let's say if I wanted to put test your pressure cuff on you so I can get your pulse rating, they tell them, can I put this on? They actually allow them to touch, people with autism, touch the back, see, and play with it prior to putting it on. And they tell them that's not going to hurt. So they have to explain themselves, tell them what they're going to do prior to them doing it. That's the way they're taught. And that's the way we teach our cadets to do that too. Tell them what I want to do prior to me doing it.
Dr. Bridger, do you have anything to add to this line of the conversation?
No, I do not have anything to add. Thank you.
I'm just going to touch base with you periodically, or just feel free to jump on in if you've seen anything in the research that you're doing. So our next question is, I have a visual disability, invisible mobile disability, and PTSD. How can I and others get officers to believe us when we try to explain our disabilities? So there's a concern there that when the disability is invisible, that and there's sometimes no way to prove it. How do you get an officer to understand that this is an existing condition for you and believe you?
Let me just step in real quick. In the past, it was real hard for us to find out if they were lying to us or not. Most of the people, like specifically myself that I dealt with, were always hiding something. And of course, not everybody's a good or outstanding citizen, but we still had to go through the process of talking to people and letting them and finding out what's going on, what's wrong. Tell me some, like a medical terminology that I can find out and look at myself to make sure you're not lying to me if there's something really wrong with you. And as I continued to go through the years, I could find out when they were always telling us whether it was true or not, because of you people, we become more, should we say, receptive and understanding the medical terminology. Some people tell us we recognize it. And some other people, of course, that are making up in line, but turns out to be, of course, that they're lying, just don't want to go to jail and try to come up with something. Should we say, it's something me as being a field training officer that was training the probation officers coming to the street, that I was telling them, take your time to talk to people, find out what's going on, if why they're reacting the same way they are reacting. Don't be hard to respond to be harsh to respond. Just all we have is time. Let's figure out, let's try to find a way to communicate. That's the way when I remember back in the day, that it was different. And I'm sure it's changed now with Officer Garza. He's been training the cadets now, and I do see a change that they are more controlled, and they're asking more questions and more concerned than back when I came to the department a while back. You can see there's a big difference now.
Melanie, if you don't mind, that was one of the things that I kind of mentioned at the beginning. You know, it's challenging for police officers to spot some of these disabilities that aren't often outward facing, or they're not obvious. I kind of mentioned that at the beginning, but I think through better training that we have now and better resources for police officers, that we now have a better understanding, and that we now recognize that these disabilities are not so easily recognizable, so that we have to listen to people, communicate better, and through better training, we're able to understand better.
So is this one of those areas where knowing who the safe officer in your neighborhood can be beneficial, so that if at some point you do get into some kind of trouble, there is somebody who is there to vouch for who you are, and so on and so forth? And then how easy is it to meet your safe officer?
Well, okay, so it's very easy to meet your safe officer. All a person would have to do is call your substation for your service area, let them know your address, and they'll be able to tell you who your safe officer is. And then let the service person know, or the sergeant know, that you'd like to meet that safe officer. And you're very right. If your safe officer knows their residents like they're supposed to, and they do, we have some fantastic safe officers throughout our city. There's 120 safe officers throughout San Antonio, and they know the residents in their areas. And that's a good resource for officers who may not be able to identify somebody. They'll be able to contact the safe officer, and that safe officer should be able to tell you who that person is, and if they have disabilities or not. A safe officer is a fantastic resource for a police officer out in the field. Absolutely.
Natalia, will you put the link to the safe office, the safe command center?
Yes.
Don't know terminology, sorry. Into
every substation has a safe unit. And so all 6 substations have a safe unit, and they serve that particular service side of town that the station is in.
Shauna, do we have, I think we have a couple of people who would like to ask their question live. Would you please read off the first name?
Sure. I have Sheila Brown.
And Karen, would you unmute Sheila for us? Sheila, you should see an ask to unmute.
Hi, thank you, Melanie. But first of all, I want to thank the officers. You guys do a great job. My question is, the officers are trained and the firefighters are trained. Are the 911 operators trained in asking the appropriate question to find out what the person's disability is, whether it be autism or hidden disability?
Our dispatcher, well, our 911 call takers do have a set of questions depending on how the call comes in. So if a call comes in and the call taker says that whatever the situation is happening because, let's say it's a mental health call, or if the person has a disability, there are questions that they ask that can give more information to the officer responding to the call. If that answers your question.
Okay. So speaking of questions that law enforcement ask, one of the reasons why we are very vague in our data on how crime impacts people with disabilities in our local community is because there's not a question during the investigation, or it's not one of the demographic things that we include in reports, unless the officer just happens to state a wheelchair was thrown to the side, or it's just not a common part of the reporting process, which means we don't have good data in our community on how crime is impacting the disability community. Can any of y'all speak to that concern?
I agree with you. It should be documented, but I just don't know where it would be documented. I would want to say and hope that it would be in our police reporting system, but I haven't seen that, and I can't really speak too much about that because I frankly don't know if it's in there or not.
Okay. Because I mean, oftentimes you identify the race of the person, you might identify an age range of the person, but the disability status is not, unless it's kind of happenstance. And so it makes it really hard to do some of the disability work because we don't have data on how crime impacts our community, especially like in domestic violence cases and things like that. So just something also to consider. Anybody else have anything to add? I saw your mic off, Deputy Chief.
Well, I had a thought, and so when you're asking about documenting calls or particular crimes involving somebody in the IDD community, I'm not sure. Are you talking about identifying what their particular disability is? Is that what you're referring to?
So even if we started with just documenting a disability, whether it was a visual, a hearing, a intellectual developmental disability, a mental health disability, or a physical disability, any type of indicator would start to help us build the data to know how that's impacting our community, so that we can start to look at some solutions and resolutions around what our disability community is experiencing. And currently, I know that there is a process for scanning that reporting, but it just doesn't come up very often because it's not a required part of the documentation. So if an officer happens to mention something, we get that data. And I say we collectively, the disability community and the people who are looking through those reports, but it makes it challenging to know where the disability community stands in facing crime and how in that area. So
well,
it's just
my first response to that, and I would really have to do some research. Maybe Dr. Bridger might have more to say on it, but my first response would be that if we started identifying disabilities or that kind of thing, as soon as that report is finalized, that's public information. So I don't know if that is perhaps why we don't. I would have to research, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I don't know that we want that, a disability tied to an individual that's in a report. I'm not sure if that's the reason. Maybe Dr. Bridger might have some idea of that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Deputy Chief. If we do create a report, then it becomes fodder for open records requests. There is a question in my mind about whether a disability could be considered protected under HIPAA. And so then you could make the argument that that could be redacted information because HIPAA laws would prevent it. But that would be something we need to visit with the city attorney's office.
Okay, thank you. Shanti, would you like to read the next question in the chat?
Yes. So the next one is saying that my husband and I are both blind. In an emergency response, how do police confirm that they are police?
Well, typically, let me just step in here. I think we furnish ourselves, we identify ourselves to anybody that, especially in that situation, that we are the police. And if they have a way that they want to verify, they can call our substation, and we'll give them our name and our badge number and tell them why we're there or why we're contacting them. And we have no problem waiting for them to get through to somebody to verify that we are police.
The other way too.
Go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. The other way too is also, if they're calling 911, they're told that they can stay on the line with the 911 dispatcher until officers arrive. So the dispatcher sees when we arrive, where we arrive, and if we're currently knocking on that door, they're still able to stay on the phone and to confirm who's there. So the dispatcher can actually give them the officer's name. You understand?
Thank you. And that is true if you're pulled over as well. You can call 911 to verify that the person who has pulled you over is in fact a law officer. Is that correct?
Yes.
They can do that.
And if the law officer approaches the window prior to you getting confirmation, is there a way to let them know that you're just verifying before you roll down a window?
They can wait and stand by, yes, ma'am. Because I'm going to have it relayed back to me by dispatch, telling me that they're currently on 911, and that the 911 dispatcher tell them, yes, he is true and correct officer with San Antonio with the badge number so-and-so there on the traffic stop. So,
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. Shauna, do we have a next person who would like to ask their question live?
Yes, we have Angela Michelle.
Karen, would you unmute Angela?
Hi, y'all y'all answered it. I'm the one who's blind with a breathing disability, and my question was just how do I guess, get officers to really believe that I do have these disabilities? I know y'all mentioned the medical jargon. What I would say there is my disabilities, my diseases are so rare that most doctors don't even understand them unless I'm talking to my specialist. So I kind of doubt that y'all would. So that's it. And thank you guys for being here.
So the next question that I see is, how do you prepare for an altercation with police that might happen away from your home, your safe officer, when you have an invisible disability like autism, Tourette's, etc.? So I guess, how do you I'm wondered about that too. When you cannot see the badge, how do you prepare for an altercation with police that might happen away from home or away from your safe officer? Okay, so in an area where nobody really knows you, and you're trying to communicate your disability to an officer. Again, I imagine remain calm. Calm equates to calm. But I'll let y'all,
All
if
right.
you feel like there's something more to add that you haven't already said.
Okay, I want to kind of make it clear. So when we have like a registration on a vehicle check or a traffic stop, the officer's trained to actually do a data entry about that vehicle that he is stopping, because he wants to inquire, number one, if it's stolen. Okay, and it comes back to safety. But if he were to do that, and it'll come back communication impediment, like I said, involved with that vehicle, associated with the registered owner of the vehicle. Now, the only way that that would happen is if the registered owner contacts the state when they go get their registration for their vehicle and let them know, hey, I have a communication impediment. And I do know for their driver's license or ID card, they specifically have to fill out the DL-101 form. The DL-101 form is the communication impediment that's placed on the back of their license. It's not a restrictions. It's right next to the driver's license part where it has restrictions. It would say none for restrictions, and then it would say communication impediment, both on their driver's license and ID card. And again, that's only if they want to provide that information to the state to get it on their ID or driver's license.
Okay. Shauna, is there another person who would like to ask a question live?
I do not see anyone else, but there is a question from Rachel.
Yeah.
And her question, are you going to get to that? Or are you going to?
Yeah, I can, I'll read that one. So what is the reporting procedure in order to report a San Antonio Fire Department professional who has been deliberately bullying residents with disabilities?
Well, the San Antonio Fire Department has an internal process to investigate members of their department. And so what I probably can do is look up a number for the main office, or the chief's office probably, for the fire department, and put it in the chat. And that would give you the opportunity to call to inquire about that internal process. It's a little different than our internal process, but if I gave you the main number, you could call and inquire about their internal process.
Thank you. I'm gonna unmute Columba. I think she had some other questions for you.
Yes, I do. I have a grandson that has mental illness, learning disabilities, and PTSD, depression, chronic depression. And she was picked up at the corner because he was smoking marijuana, because he was living in the streets. They have a record of him for many years. He was sexually abused when he was six years old. And every time he goes, they put him in jail and he gets raped because he's 5 feet tall and weighs 90 pounds. So I feel like sometimes the police target those small kids to satisfy the rest of the inmates, because the record isn't there, he has mental illness. So he should not be going to jail. He should go and get treatment. They don't do treatment. And that's the big problem that we have. Like I said, he has mental illness, PTSD, chronic depression. He's 5 feet tall. So for God's sake, what is he doing in jail instead of going to a center to get help for drugs? He's doing drugs because he's doing drugs to make him feel better, I guess. I don't know. He was caught up in the corner smoking marijuana. For God's sake, everybody smokes marijuana. I don't, but everybody does. And it's so unfair because he's in jail right now. I mean, in jail. No treatment at all. And I think it's so unfair. Very unfair, because he has mental illness, disabilities. I mean, it's just horrible, horrible. And they do it to all the kids. And I just hate the sheriff, because I think he gets those kids, small kids, so he can go to jail and satisfy the red inmates. I'm sorry, that's how I feel. It's just not fair at all. They have a record of him with mental illness and they put him in jail. I'm sorry, that's not fair at all. It's just ugly. It just breaks my heart in pieces. But there's nothing I can do about it.
Columba, I know that the deputy chief is going to address your concerns, but I do also want to make sure that you saw her email address, and she has offered to speak with you directly to see what can be done. Deputy Chief?
Yes, Columba, I left my email address. If you have
Yes, I got it.
to email me, I'd be happy to, if you want to leave me a number, I'll be happy to call you.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes.
There's so many kids like my grandson. I'm sorry.
No, we all have loved ones and we care very much. So. Oh my goodness.
Oh, looks like Melanie's internet froze. Melanie, you back? There you are.
I am back. Sorry about that. Okay, so do we have any other questions in the chat?
No other questions at this time in the chat.
All right. Dr. Bridger, you've heard some of the concerns addressed this evening, and I know that your work has been just really interesting. I would love to hear if there are any best practices that you've seen out there within the context of this conversation that you would like to share or talk about, or elaborate on anything that you've been able to find out there.
What I would say is that generally speaking, San Antonio Police Department implements a lot of best practices. And in fact, a lot of places, as you saw, Canada adopting what we've started here in San Antonio and Texas. So I think that the police department, any department that has as many people as it does will have one or two folks that we need to deal with. But I think that they've worked really hard over the last decade to implement some of these really impressive best practices. And, sometimes we need to scale them up to make sure that they're across the entire city. And sometimes we need to refresh and also look at, the police can't be the solution to every 911 call that we receive. And so what is a better response? We can't keep, it's a little bit like training our teachers to be able to address every issue that our kids in school have. At some point, we need to allow teams that have specialists to take the baton from the police and provide more appropriate, more in-depth responses. And so I think that's what we're seeing more of, is that it's less that the police are doing something wrong and more that the police respond to a crisis, and we need a team who can take the baton from the police after the crisis situation is over and work with people so that we don't just keep repeating the crises over and over and over. So we're not done yet. We're still gathering a bunch of data and looking at what every other place across the United States is doing to see if we can learn of other best practices. But when we call them, they're like, well, we were just getting ready to call you because y'all do this really well. So, but it's, I'm not trying to say that everything that the city does is perfect. I'm just saying we need to make sure that the right people respond to the right situation at the right time. And that is the work that we've been doing over the last several months.
And like Dr. Bridger mentioned earlier, the SAPD review services review is online. The work that they've done so far, you can watch the community meetings, you can look at the surveys and the results. If you do have ideas on how the community can work together with law enforcement for better results in San Antonio, you can certainly message those in the chat. You can email them to advocacy@disabilitysa.org, and we're happy to communicate those into the conversation. This is an area that we are involved in, with amplifying the voices of individuals with disabilities in our community. So please feel free to share those ideas and suggestions in the chat or at advocacy@disabilitysa.org. And is there still an opportunity through the SAPD and me to add input? Does anybody know?
Yes, there is. If you go to the website, there is an opportunity to leave your input, and also wanted to address Tyler Rowe's question about, are we seeking community input as to who should be involved with the multidisciplinary teams? Yes, that is, I mentioned we've done 27 community conversations around these issues, and that is one of the group of questions that we're asking people is, for these services you've identified as potentially receiving an alternative response, who do you think should provide that alternative response? So we've been gathering some really great data from the community about that.
Okay. We do have an additional, thank you, Dr. Bridger, sorry, distracted by the chat. Any exposure to aphasia populations? And how often does police training happen to cover these sensitive issues? Does anybody have a response to that? And if not, we can certainly get that response at a later time.
Melanie, there was a concern someone wanted me to express.
Okay.
And it was in regards to sexual assault with individuals who have disabilities. And just in regards to how to ensure, justice is received, because this individual never received justice for their family member. And so that's a huge concern. And they also made, I guess they were asking about training for certain individuals as well too, and as it relates to sexual assault with individuals with disability.
So Officer Garza, is there any specific training that goes into that outside the regular domestic violence response that's specific to working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
As far as them making the report, when we basically have our report writing part in the cadet program, they actually tell them to contact the family, like their mother or their fathers, their family, could be their uncles, any family related with that person who is the victim, so they can get more information as well from the victim as well, them together.
And are they trained to bring in other professionals who might be able to help with the communication process, so that the person with IDD is not, that assumptions aren't made that this person is able to respond to consent to follow commands or give oriented details?
Yes, they do have different programs that are allowed out there. I'll give you an example. One of them is our Deaf Link system. Let's say, for example, if we do receive a call and the subject was brought up for sexual assault and somebody who is deaf. So obviously the handling officer would have to communicate with that victim, correct? So we would have to reach out, number one, to our follow-up unit as well and get them involved. And on top of that, be aware that we need to make good communication with the victim. So the officer is trained to utilize the DefLink system in that case.
Deputy Chief, are there any other resources for working with the IDD community?
Sure. So our SVU Special Victims Unit quite often works with the Rape Crisis Unit, who has specialists or outreach individuals who specialize in handling of sexual assault cases with IDD and that sort of thing. They have individuals who are with an IDD individual every step of the way. If there's not a family member, let's say that there's someone who lives at a facility who doesn't have a family member, so they'll have someone that's assigned to be with that individual, that victim, every step of the way, from the minute that a police report's made to an exam at the hospital, all the way through the process. So Special Victims Unit is the follow-up unit on a sexual assault case, and there will be somebody assigned to that victim throughout the process.
And Officer, thank you. Officer Garza, going back to what you were talking about for individuals who are deaf, every police car is now equipped with the DefLink system. Is that correct? So every officer has access to that?
Yes, ma'am. Even as well as the substation, yes, ma'am.
Excellent. How long has that been in place now?
Oh, it's been a couple of years. I think the DC chief would know more than me, but I know it's been a long time.
So in 2019, we were able to switch out all the computers in the cars from the old laptops to our new CF33s. And they have the capability of running DefLink from the side of the road if we need to. So that transition was made in 2019.
That's great. And another way that we are doing good work here in San Antonio. So
absolutely,
that's awesome. Do we have any other questions in the chat that we haven't addressed? Shanti?
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Sergeant Justin Rimmers. I'm the supervisor that's in charge of all the cadet training at the academy. I was trying to unmute earlier when they were asking that question about aphasia. That is something that we actually do teach at the academy to all of our cadets. It's an actual state mandated course. It's a traumatic brain injury. It's 6 hours in length, and it instructs all the cadets and the officers what is aphasia and all the effects that could and can happen to individuals that suffer from traumatic brain injury, and how to deal and approach and communicate with those individuals. So yes, ma'am, we do teach cadets and officers that.
Thank you so much for responding to that. I appreciate it. Any last questions? Let's see. Okay. Oh, you know what? I had one, and then we'll ask this other one. Law enforcement officers that work in the independent school districts, in the school districts here in San Antonio, do they go through the Sapd Academy?
No, ma'am,
No.
they don't.
There's
Each school district has their own police department and they have their own training.
okay. And is there any collaboration? Because I know that there's a lot of concern around the training of ISD officers within the realm of working with people with disabilities, and there doesn't seem to be much training. So is that anything that they work with you guys on as any collaborations or anything like that, or it's just everything's independent?
Well, the one thing that we do is we teach them CIT training, which is a crisis intervention training. My mental health unit provides that training to the school district police officers. As far as IDD training, to my knowledge, they do their own training. I'll defer to Officer Garza, but I want to say they do their own training when it comes to that sort of thing.
Officer Garza, is there any?
I do know for a fact that I've actually been up to airport police and actually taught this course to the airport police. I can't really answer for the school district part. I do know for a fact that if the officer has his basic peace officer course and he needs to advance to the intermediate part, and the next one after that is your advancement, and then finally your master's. If you're going to advance in law enforcement, those are the different licenses that you go through, and that is one of the requirement courses that you must have as far as advancing. So they have to get it.
Okay. So here we have one more question. SAPD attitudes vary by substation. The prevalence of disability is higher in some of those areas, such as in areas covered by the East substation. There are some officers who want to work there, but others have attitude to blame the victim for anything and say, that's why I don't live in San Antonio. Officers in East substation frequently do not file reports for victims or refuse to talk to witnesses who have disabilities. This individual is the COPS coordinator for Highland Park NA, and they are in the East substation area. There's also a problem when there are 6 areas that have safe officers, but they aren't allowed to do that work. I'm sorry, that's a little choppy. But I guess maybe the question is when somebody has an issue with one of the substations, is there a protocol or a process for moving above that station or that officer in order to get a better response? Or what is the process to bring attention to maybe a lack of response that you might be getting from a substation?
Well, I can answer that. So if an officer is called to take a report and they're not doing what a resident feels needs to be done, every officer works for a supervisor, a sergeant. So that resident has the right to ask for a sergeant, either to make the scene or to respond. And if that is not happening, then I would encourage those residents to go to the East substation and perhaps speak to the station commander about the issue. Those officers, if they're called to take a report, they need to be taking a police report if it's required. So just know if a resident needs a report made and the officer's not doing it, that officer has a supervisor they respond to. The citizen should be asking to speak with that supervisor. And if that's not happening, then they need to speak with the substation commander, which is a captain at the East substation.
Okay, I have one question that was pre-submitted. This person is having to live in fear of management at her apartment because they are, I'm sorry, having to live in fear of management from my apartment letting people in and leaving doors unlocked and not going to check if the work that has been done was done right, I assume on the locks on the door. So this puts her in a challenging situation because she lives with a fixed income. Is there any course of action that can be taken with engaging law enforcement to ensure that property managers are making sure that locks are and safety is in place for their residents?
Melanie, if I understood the question correctly, the caller is having an issue with the manager on site and perhaps maybe the maintenance personnel?
And the assurance, so I guess somebody will come in and fix a lock, but the management doesn't ensure that the lock was actually fixed. And so they are in fear of people coming in and out and doors remaining unlocked within the building.
Well, my recommendation would be for that resident to call the actual property management company of the apartment complex if she's having or he's having an issue with the on-site management. Because at this point, it doesn't sound like it's a criminal matter. Unless people are actually just walking into her apartment that she has no idea who they are and that kind of thing. But if it's an issue that she's not getting what she needs from her on-site management company, it sounds like she needs to escalate that to like a regional property manager for the apartment complex.
Thank you so much. So one last question has come in, and I think it's an interesting question to close out on. So does SAPD hire officers who have a disability?
I think the chief's going to take that one because I don't know about recruiting. I do know that Dallas has actually got a female officer. She's got a cochlear implant as an officer, and she does sign. She signs different, I want to say 8 to 9 different languages. So she is an active police officer for that. She's up in Dallas. I do know that.
What I can say is, so we have civil service rules and we have testing procedures that have to be passed to get on the police department. And what I would say is if someone could pass those tests to get into our academy, then they would make an academy class. And so those are academic standards, those are physical training standards, a medical test. There's a process. And if somebody could pass that entire process and make it into academy class, they would make it into the San Antonio Police Department, or at least into the academy. Then that's another ball game. You have to pass the academy to do that. But if they can make it through the applicant processing part, make it into an academy class, pass the academy and graduate, then you would make it onto the San Antonio Police Department.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, the questions keep pouring in, and this is an interesting one. So does SAPD now just use the VRI, or do you have your own interpreters on staff as well?
No, we
So
do
we
not.
do.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Adrian. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we do have some officers that are actually ASO certified, if that's what you're asking.
That's the question, yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Right, Chief.
Thank you. Just in case there's time for the officers who might have a disability but are able to pass all of the criteria, are accommodations provided to those recruits?
Well, since it hasn't happened, I can't speak to that.
Okay.
At this point.
Awesome. Karina, did that answer your question? Yes, she's nodding. Okay. Guys, thank you so much for your time this evening. Dr. Bridger, Chief Deputy Falks, Officer Lucio, and Officer Garza, and Officer Rimmers. We appreciate your time in addressing some of our questions and concerns. And if you'll allow me, if we get questions in after the fact, and I would love to be able to send those to you and get responses to our participants as we are able to. we've enjoyed the back and forth and the ability to express our concerns as well as get answers to many of our questions. And I know sometimes it's uncomfortable, and I appreciate you being there, and we obviously appreciate the work that you're doing in our communities. So thank you for your extra time. I know it's way past everybody's bedtime. No, just kidding. It's only 7:30, but we do appreciate y'all being here and adding to our conversation. So on that note, we are going to post up a screen of our upcoming, well, I'm so sorry. Any last comments from any of you that you would like to communicate? I should give you an opportunity for closing.
I think it was a very good session that Joe put together, not only for us internally, but also with the public. So I really like that. I hope this continues.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie, on behalf of Chief McManus and the police department. Thank you. It was very informative, and we enjoyed being able to answer questions for the community.
Great.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Yes, thank you for the invitation. We greatly appreciate the opportunity. And please do, if you have more questions, please do email them to us, and we'd be happy to get you the answers. Thank you.
All right, so on the screen, we are posting up our upcoming Conversation 360s. On August 3rd, we will be discussing entertainment and disability. October 5th, civic responsibility and disability. And then on December 7th, faith and disability. And again, our Conversation 360s are for everybody in our community who's interested in exploring how these issues impact people living with disability and how we can all take a role to move our community forward. So people living with a disability and people without coming together to make our community a better place. And at DisABILITYsa, we have that vision to make San Antonio the #1 community where people with disabilities want to live, work, and play. So thank you for joining us this evening to talk about public safety and disability and how we can advance our community. On that note, again, thank you to the planning team. Thank you to our interpreters, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.
Melanie, Rachel wants to know if the other Conversation 360s will be online.
We have not talked about not doing them online. We tend to be able to reach a broader audience when we do them. So for right now, we are still looking at online conversations. And as we learn and grow, we might move to a hybrid. But for now, we haven't talked about doing anything different just yet. Bert, it's so good to see your beautiful face. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Bye, Melanie. Bye, Martina.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.